Hello. How you doing,
Hi,
Natasha?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Not sure if anyone will be right in from the start. Usually takes with a live like a few minutes for people to join. But anyone who is there or is watching this from a replay, then hello and welcome to ROI Unlocked. Today, Natasha and I will be talking about ROI in the recruitment sector, particularly with reference to operations and marketing, but again, more generally across your technology, your suppliers, your job boards, all of that good stuff, which we like to measure to make sure that it is doing what we said it would do. And obviously, it wouldn't be me if I didn't bring AI into the conversation as well. So we'll talk a little bit about measuring ROI on AI as well. So yeah, should we start with an intro? Do you want to go first, Natasha?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Natasha. I am a fractional COO for the recruitment sector. So I work with lots of different sort of SME recruitment businesses that are looking to build the foundations for supporting their growth over the next few years. And I also work directly training and mentoring operations functions within the recruitment businesses. And I'm also co-founder of a operations and compliance outsourcing business as well. So when it comes to everything ops, there's not much that I'm not covering or I've not got under control somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Pete Hogg. So I'm the founder of MQLFlow. I'm an automation consultant, and my job is basically to reduce your manual processes to make you more productive and profitable. And that involves integrating your systems together and weaving AI into your workflows. So my background is I actually spent 15 years in the marketing in the marketing sector, so as a marketer in the recruitment sector, particularly focused on digital marketing and marketing automation, before making a transition into the AI software sector, working for a venture-backed AI startup. So that's my background. That's our backgrounds, and let's talk about ROI. So I have some slides. So let me add that to the stage. Yeah, so here's what we'll be talking about in today's session. So yeah, why it matters, what are the common challenges, calculating ROI. So we've got some formulas that I'll be going through later. We're going to be talking about practical steps for tracking them, making a business case. We're going to recommend a few tools for building ROI dashboards, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about what you should automate, because not everything should be automated. Humans are pretty useful for doing things too still. We haven't been completely overtaken. So awesome. Let's get started. So Natasha, let's start with you. Why does ROI matter in recruitment, ops and marketing?
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things where when you look at the structure of a recruitment business, you've got the kind of sales versus everything else that's going on. And sales, it's really easy to see if you're making any revenue from whether you're investing in people or whether you're investing in tools on that side. And that's why I think when you look at things that aren't necessarily direct revenue generating, like operations or marketing, that we actually have the ability to be able to show the return on investment that you're putting into those things. And the reason that I think it's so important that we have this conversation today is these are the things that is not always the easiest to measure. So making sure that you've got that infrastructure in place to actually show the investment, show the return on investment is really important, because a lot of the time what happens is we kind of get to the end of a year-long contract and we're like, oh, are we renewing this product? Are we renewing this supplier? Has this worked? And we don't always have those answers to hand. So I think that's why today we want to sort of kind of talk about what should we have in place, what should we be expecting, and making sure that we've got the ability to kind of put something on the table straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important, isn't it? Especially when those contract renewals come up and the CFO is tapping you on the shoulder and like, do we actually still need this? And Because the trouble is, as soon as you get rid of a tool that people are using, someone always goes, we were using that, and I'm not doing my job the way I used to do it. So we need to be careful about making sure we track those things. So where do you see like the most common challenges?
Yeah, so I think, like I say, it's that getting to the end of a process or getting to the end of a contract and then going, oh, what should we have been measuring for this? Or we were kind of told this during the sales process, and we've got a year, 2 years down the line, and we can't actually directly see that it's had that impact. So I think for me, whenever we're talking about anything from an ROI, from an operational perspective, is we're starting that thought process right at the beginning during that procurement phase, and actually making sure that we're making good choices about the tech that we're bringing into the business. Sorry, those of you that know me will.
New caller has joined.
Yeah, will know this cat very well. It's about kind of making sure that you're thinking about that from day one. And from a practical perspective, do you have that physical infrastructure in place to be able to measure it? So when we think about things like tools for the sales team and stuff like that, sometimes it can be a case of, have you updated the CRM to make sure that you've got completely fresh new source codes in? Do you have an accurate list of what people can be allocating their revenue to at the moment? And it's not a case of just, do you have those source codes in place? Is it communicated within the business that actually it's really important that you put the right source code on? Because you as a recruiter, if you want to keep this tool and you want to still have access to it, we need to be able to show, actually, we have generated X amount of candidates through this. We've had this much revenue allocated to this. So it's not about just going, okay, we've brought on this tool, we expect that it's going to make us £100,000 this year. Have you actually thought about the practical steps that you need to make to educate your consultants on measuring that ROI, on why it's important to measure that ROI, and building that before we start? And that kind of takes us on to the next challenge, which is, what do you do if it's not something that you're going to directly allocate revenue to, which is one of the most difficult things that we talk about, which is, okay, we can say we've got a candidate, we can say we've got a client, we can put some money on that, but what do we do if actually we're looking to save time? Or what do we do if it's a product that's doing something else? Thinking about, where do you expect to see that increased productivity elsewhere? And thinking about that from the beginning. So the expectation being, sorry, I'm going to put her down because she's walking. The expectation being, okay, well, if we're saving time on you having a note-taking tool, what does that mean you're going to be doing more of? You know, should we be seeing more phone calls going out? Should we be seeing more outreach from emails and stuff like that? Kind of really thinking about what's going to show us that this tool is doing what it says it's doing, or what we've been sold to by the supplier.
Yeah, I mean, that specific example that you're talking about with a note-taking tool, I think a lot of that is actually not necessarily about, it is a time-saving tool. I also think it's an engagement tool as well. So, when you're frantically making notes, when you're talking to, screening clients or candidates, you're not making eye contact, you're maybe missing notes, and then when you follow up, you haven't got everything to hand. So I think that, for me, when I'm having my calls with clients, I'm able to make eye contact. All of the information is stored. I've got a really, really good resource that I can go back to for the next follow-up. And then, now we're starting to see more AI implementation within CRM systems as a lot of the major suppliers are building that functionality in. Those notes, if they're the more comprehensive they are, the better data those systems have got to work with as well. So actually, sometimes it might be more difficult to measure immediate ROI on that as a time-saving tool, but you need to think about the improved data sets that you're getting from having those things. And going back to your earlier point as well, talking about measuring ROI when you have a candidate or a client that's come through, this stems right back to your CRM champion, your operations and marketing teams as well, is actually making sure that those sources are properly set up in the CRM system to begin with. Because it's all well and good saying, oh, the recruiter we need to make sure that they allocate it to the right place. But if it's not there and it's not clear and it's not easy for them to find, they'll just choose headhunting every time as the source of where this person or company came from, right? That's just by default, everything is headhunting or LinkedIn, right? So we need to make sure that that's in there. And then another way to counteract that as well is actually to remove that onus from the consultant themselves to be responsible for manually populating the sources through using better integration. So if you're integrating your job boards directly into your CRM system, if your website is automatically pushing your candidates and leads through to your CRM system, all of that should be automatically attributed to those sources, so that you've got a much more reliable sense of where that came from. Same with LinkedIn. You're pulling, if you've got an integration or a Chrome extension where you can automatically pull people across, that should be tagged straight away as part of that integration. So then you've got a much more reliable source of measuring that. So I always recommend, of course, I would always recommend automation and integration, but you can see the value that brings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting one, right? Because when we're looking at the reasons behind why that ROI piece is so important, the other thing to say for this is it also gives you a negotiation point when you're having those conversations with the suppliers. And the more accurate that is, i.e., hopefully, fingers crossed, from having some kind of integration where that stuff is just going in, you're able to then stand in a position of power when you're negotiating if something actually isn't giving you the ROI that it should be doing, because there then is also no question of accuracy. So it's not a case of, oh, we think that you should be having more ROI on this. It's like, actually, this is hooking up. We know exactly what's coming from here, and we can see that actually we're not getting the quality of candidates that we need to, or leads, BD, whatever it is. What do you think in terms of, so obviously you mentioned there around the quality from that note-taking example of going, actually, this is helping you further down the line. Do you think we should be kind of having tools like that are perhaps a little bit more like holistic and a little bit more difficult to measure that direct ROI? Should they kind of be almost in their own category? Should we be looking at different things when we're looking at how that's helping our process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think for me the ideal scenario for for a tech setup, and I know we talked about this a little bit in our previous session, tech stack tune-up, was that actually removing the onus of the consultant to actually be using or be entering things manually into the system actually gives them more time that they can spend with the clients and the candidates to develop those relationships. And actually, I think that when we're thinking about like what's the return on those things, my expectation would be not necessarily that it would be tracking metrics like, the increase in the amount of calls and things like that. But actually, like, yes, I think you can track those things, but, the KPIs are indicators, right? So, I think another thing I would expect to see is actually like increasing conversions. Like, are you measuring, how the percentage of deals that you're actually the placements you're actually making? I think you would expect to see things like that go up if you're able to spend more time actually interacting with and engaging with people. Even like getting consultants and team leaders actually to account manage and go on site to actually have face-to-face conversations with people, get them away from their desk for a bit and build actual relationships. Like a lot of consultants, the only time they actually see people face-to-face is at conferences sometimes. So I think by introducing more automation and reducing administrative burden, I would expect to not necessarily just track the time saved on completing those tasks, but like in terms of where is that time reinvested, if that's invested in the right way, as I say, my ideal would be that it's about building those personal relationships. Then I think you would expect naturally to see those other metrics, like conversions, like placements, and obviously like revenue increase naturally alongside that.
And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because actually that you can tie that into like your overall business objectives, right? So if you're looking at the way that your business is operating at the moment and going, actually, we think we need to improve our account development relationships, being able to bring something back to going, actually, this is how this is going to help us achieve this overall business objective. It's not necessarily about saying, yes, we picked up 3 extra clients from this, but actually, has it helped your business establish better development strategies and processes? Because like you say, you're having that engagement, you're not typing away or missing things out. Because I think that's another important thing to think about, is tying it into what the business is trying to achieve, and actually that in itself being a return on investment.
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting to consider as well is how people talk about return on investment, or how people define return on investment as well.
Yeah.
So, like I've heard people in businesses say, oh, we had a $5,000 return on investment. It's like, well, what does that mean? What was the investment?
Yeah.
So yeah, that which kind of leads us on to talking about, okay, what is return on investment? What does that actually mean? What does that look like, and how do you actually calculate it? Because this is quite literally like, what is the return compared to what is the investment?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to bring another slide on, which is actually a formula that not just I use, but this is commonly used for all kinds of investments. So you're taking a monetary value, like what do you, and this can help as well to assess things prior to making that investment as well. So you can take an estimated saving or an estimated revenue increase, divide that by the total amount that you're investing into it, and then that is going to produce as a percentage figure your ROI. So this is how we can assess tools. And what this will do as well is, if we're making, let's say, for example, nightmare scenario, but we need to replace our CRM system, like there's a lot to think about, right?
Yeah.
So if you're comparing your short list of CRM systems, they're all priced slightly differently. They've all got slightly different features and benefits. This is a calculation that you can make in order to assess, actually, what do we think is going to give us the best return. So I'll give a couple of actual examples of how this might work. So example 1, time saving tool. It costs $2,500. The task that you're trying to do is normally done by somebody who's paid £50 an hour, and it's going to save them an hour a week, right? So how would we calculate the return on investment of that? So that person's hour saved times the rate that they're paid at, times 52, so 52 weeks of the year. So that's going to be your total number of hours saved, your total financial saving for that 1 year, divided by the investment. And actually, in this instance, that would be 104% return on investment, which means it's going to pay for itself in less than a year. So 100% means it's going to be paying for itself in a year. Now, when I do my ROI calculations for clients, when I'm doing a strategy and deciding like where are the areas that we want to automate in your business, I will always do an ROI calculation. So that helps us prioritize the areas of the business that we can tackle as a priority. But then also I can say, look, if this isn't paying for itself within 3 years, the way that technology is moving at the pace that it's moving at, it might not be worth your investment at this stage. So, we're always looking to do the higher the ROI on something, the better investment that's going to be. And just jumping back to the CRM system, let's say, you were making this investment into the business of 120 grand as a random figure that I pulled out to make the calculations easy. So then it was expected to generate you an extra 5 grand a year. An extra 5 grand a month. So by the end of the year. So £5,000 times 12 divided by 120 grand investment, that's a 50% ROI. It's going to pay for itself in 2 years. And again, you can see how this can be used not only to understand like what is the return going to be on a product or even just like a new business development unit. It's going to be on a supplier, all kinds of things that a job board, all that kind of stuff. Like we can use this same formula for all of that stuff, and we can get to a really good comparative figure and have a really good appreciation and understanding of where the money's going, and how and the actual return that we're getting on that.
And I think what's interesting about that as well is thinking about the timescales and appropriate timescales for seeing a ROI on something. And I think I see this in both directions. So obviously you've talked about that longer term stuff, and actually saying, something's not going to pay for itself in 3 years. That's probably not going to be the best investment at this point, or it's not that big of a deal within your business right now that needs to be an area that you should consider automating or putting tech into. But also one of the flip sides of this, and where I see a lot of it, like businesses kind of making this mistake is, and I've talked about this before, is like 1 month trials on things are useless, right? A month is almost certainly not enough time for you to actually see ROI on something. And I've seen it before where businesses kind of go through and they're just constantly trialing all of these different products, only taking it on for a month, and then deciding, okay, that product doesn't work because I've had it for a month and actually, we've not made a placement from it. And it's like, well, actually, let's take a proper look at your business and the way that your business works. And if we are looking at things like your time to fill, if your time to fill is 4 to 6 weeks, well, guess what? Unless you picked up a job the first day that you had that product, it is physically impossible for you to have got that direct ROI within that period of time. So it's also about again, going back to that kind of procurement process and thinking about when are we going to make these decisions? And actually, yes, we might take something on for a month trial because that seems like a sensible thing to do. But what should you actually expect to see within that month that's going to tell you that this is the right product for you to take on? And kind of going, okay, if we get 6 months in and all of a sudden there is no ROI on something that we should by this point see that we're picking up jobs, we're picking up candidates, whatever it is. At that point, we can go, actually, this is not showing us what we thought. And then we take a look internally and we go, okay, is this because we are not using this product correctly? Is this product, not working in the way that we're expecting it to work? What are all the different reasons why you might not be seeing the ROI that you were kind of sold or were expecting to see? But having those realistic expectations will also help you manage those products better, because then we're going to spot things earlier rather than wait until it's a year and then go, oh, actually, we didn't make a single placement off that, so let's cancel it. Is it the product, or is it the way that you're running that product internally?
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think, sales cycle length is really important to consider, exactly like you said. I think, when it comes to, tech products that aren't part of your sort of critical infrastructure, I think it's my opinion is always to go with the most flexible option that you can get. I know a lot of people will try and tie you down into long-term contracts for things, sign up for a year and you get it for 10 months kind of thing. But I tend to sign up, particularly these SaaS products where you sign up online with a credit card. I typically go for the 1 month option, because it gives me that flexibility to turn it off at any point.
Yeah.
It's all well and good paying for, getting 12 months for the price of 10. But if after 6 months you realize that this is not useful for your business, you have the option to turn it off and you've just saved yourself 4 months worth of payments, right? So, but I think that where it becomes a lot more difficult is for kind of those critical infrastructure pieces. So things like investing into a new website or investing into a CRM system. And I think when you when you choose the suppliers at that point, I think you have to be very. You can hear the background. We got So
cats galore today, unfortunately.
yeah, they're a needy bunch, aren't they? So I think when it comes to the critical investments, you really need to be doing proper due diligence in terms of vetting those people. And I think when it comes to whether that's talking to somebody else who's already used the product and getting those referrals and testimonials and understanding, basically just trying to mitigate your risk as much as possible, because those things, like you say, is if you're not seeing the ROI that you were promised, because some very good salespeople out there who will tell you that this product is going to deliver the world. I think you can estimate your ROI, but you want to make sure that if you've done that due diligence, that you're accurately assessing what you expect that to be.
Yeah, and I think having this tracking process as well is important, and also seeing your relationship with your supplier as an ongoing thing where actually you have that open communication. Because bear in mind, from a supplier's perspective as well, they don't want you to get to the end of a year or cancel that product. They want to keep you as a customer. And I think being on that sort of supplier sales side, one of the most frustrating things is that you get to the end of the year and someone just cancels with no explanation, whereby actually there were things that could have been done. So from an operational perspective, whereby we are often managing the supplier relationships, I think it's also really important to have open dialogues during this process to go, actually, we're not seeing what we thought we were going to see, or that you promised that we were going to see. So it's your responsibility to work together with that supplier, and that supplier's responsibility to make sure that actually you are using the product the way that it should be used. And there are a couple of suppliers out there within the recruitment sector that are amazing at this. Like, if you say to them, actually, I am struggling to get the recruiters to engage with this product, we're not seeing the ROI, they will be in your office, they will be there, they will be guiding the recruiters through and kind of showing them exactly how to use the products, or kind of, really driving that engagement with it. And so it's about really managing that relationship to make sure that you can spot things, that you are able to physically get that ROI, and getting the suppliers involved in that process so that they can help you. They are incentivized to help you, to keep you as a customer, and to give you tips and tricks on things that you could be doing that are going to show that ROI. But if you don't have that open relationship and kind of don't have that communication, you are just going to run through different products continuously and think that everything that you're using is shit, rather than going, actually, there are things that we could do here that could maximize this product for us.
Yeah. So we've talked quite a bit about what ROI is, how you calculate it, what are the sort of pitfalls and reasons for doing it. What metrics should people be tracking? How are they going to track them? Like, where is this data going to be? How is it going to be tracked?
Yeah, I think where possible, you want as much coming out of your CRM, right? So when we're thinking about candidate and client acquisition, like we've said, where possible, having this automated and going in a way where the consultants are not having to do it themselves. If you're looking at products that are related to the sales process, having those source codes up to date and actively tracking. Also, this is just a side note one for businesses to think about, is what's your policy on updating your sources? And like, even if you got a candidate or a client on the system from insert source previously, but they've been sat there for 10 years, but then a different product has come on and kind of reignited, having that policy in place to know how you want to manage that, I think is important from a practical perspective. Obviously, looking at things like your data reporting. So lots of the CRMs will give you source reports. So you'll be able to actively see where are people coming from, what are the tools that you're using. That's all quite easy from a revenue perspective, because in theory, there is a way for us to go, okay, we made a placement is worth X amount of money. Done. But it's the other things that become a little bit more challenging. And I think it's also about going, okay, ROI is both revenue generating, but also where is it saving us money? You know, is there a place where we can be like, actually, we have saved, whether it is off renegotiating your contracts or your suppliers to just cheaper versions of them, or whether we're saving, you know, we're consolidating products or we're consolidating suppliers, also having that cost saving as an ROI measure. And then I guess coming back to the stuff that you were talking about, Pete, is that more, I guess, conceptual almost stuff. So where's the stuff where it's like, I'm not necessarily going to allocate a specific financial piece of information against this, but it could be that we're saving time. It could be that we're getting less tickets raised, less complaints. It could be that your consultants feel like they have the better tools in the best tools in their business, and it makes them more engaged.
Yeah, and I think that this comes down to as well as like about making the business case for something, right? So particularly if you're presenting a tool which you think is going to change the game in terms of how much time it's going to give you back, how much easier your processes are going to be, how much less manual effort you'll need to put in, how much revenue, like there could be all kinds of things which you think, like, this is a really great tool, or this is a really great system, or perhaps a series of infrastructure investments which could completely change antiquated systems. Let's say, in a circumstance where this might be common in a where there's been an acquisition, for example, like you can, when you're putting together a business case for this sort of stuff, it's really great to be able to underline, particularly like if you're talking to the board, right? So I think that in my experience, it tends to be the CFOs who are more interested in what the savings are being made, and the CEOs are, particularly the guys from the sales backgrounds, are a lot more interested in how much more revenue is going to be made as well. So, but then also I think you can kind of look to the, if this is going to increase the capacity of our existing team, and that doesn't necessarily mean our existing sales consultants. That could mean our existing marketing team's capacity, for example. There's lots of great things that you can do in terms of marketing automation that can reduce the manual work that those guys are doing. The amount of times where departments, particularly in what's considered the back office in recruitment, are absolutely crying out for extra team members and saying, we're absolutely flooded. Companies quite often, a multiple of additional headcount in the sales team, but that kind of infrastructure, finance, operations, and marketing and HR, like there's been no additional headcount in there, so they're having to pick up a lot more capacity. So actually giving those guys the tools in order to be able to automate their process and become a bit more hands-off, that's going to give that's going to be an investment into the business, and it's particularly important for those guys to make a good business case. And sometimes it depends on the size of the business, because like I've been in startups where I would just talk to the founder and I would be like, this is what it's going to do, and they would be like, oh, if we do 2 deals off the back of it, it's going to pay for itself. They will have that mentality. But larger businesses, you may have a more formal process that you have to go through. So yes, just important to be aware of who you're speaking to.
And I think also it's interesting. I was literally having a conversation with one of my clients who is probably watching now, so she'll know what I'm talking about, this morning, where we were saying, particularly as you were saying about that workload piece. And sometimes we're looking for increased productivity, i.e. we're looking for what is the thing that we expect to see more of. But sometimes it's about going, our people are massively overworked, and actually they're working 5-10 hours extra a week, and this is causing issues with engagement, work-life balance, well-being, all of these things.
Yeah, potentially.
And like one of the things that we were talking about is actually sometimes it's a case of, okay, well, let's do an engagement survey where we are understanding how people are working at the moment, and actually getting a bit of scope of how many extra hours are people working at the moment, because actually they're having to do these tasks manually, and because there are things that just need to get done, and no matter if you're finishing at 6 o'clock, etc., it's got to get done. And this is particularly outside of the sales team. We know the sales team work extra hours because they get remunerated in that way, but actually, can we measure the impact on our employees from we are arming you with the tools to be able to do your job in your working hours. You are going to be happier and healthier and more productive because you are not having to kind of do all of these additional things, or these things that actually could very easily be automated. And actually that itself being a measure of ROI, having those two measurements at the beginning of that process and sort of 6 months, a year in, to go, do you know what? We've managed to reduce the extra hours that people are working by 20%. That in itself is a super powerful measure of return on investment for these things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you said, with the sales team, it's very easy to kind of measure it on a revenue basis. If let's say you're putting in a new set of AI tools that's, everybody's talking about AI now, and we want to bring AI into the business. It's like, well, okay, so how are we going to actually measure what the impact is on, the back office functions, or one of the back office functions? So I think, you can measure those things based on things like, time saved. So, track the hours before doing the process manually. Like how long does it take you to actually do this?
Yeah.
And then you can track the hours about how much time has been saved, so you can then have a metric of how much capacity that you've gained. Another one, so production velocity. So the output and the volume that's being produced. So say, for example, it's in marketing, right? So how much content is that one person or is that small team able to produce with the limited resources they've got? Giving them those additional tools maybe allows them to repurpose content faster, to produce content faster, and then all of a sudden you've got much more reach across channels which you just didn't have time to address before. And then also conversion rate differences as well. So you can measure how well is your website converting, with human written content versus AI written content. There's all sorts of things that you can measure in order to justify, not just justify, but in order to accurately assess whether these tools are helping without it needing to be directly attributed to revenue.
100%. And I guess that takes us nicely, Pete, into one of my questions. That was going to be, how do we, when we're talking about AI, how do we choose where to put AI and automation into the business? Because we talked about this in the tech stack conversation. There have been over 4,000 rec tech businesses registered just since 2020, and that is rec tech specific. That is not even talking about all of the other tools that can be utilized by the recruitment industry. And we were joking about the Rec Expo basically just purely being about AI and automation. So when you're looking at the businesses that you're working with and advising your clients, how do we decide where is the appropriate place to utilize these things?
Yeah. So this is something that I think is a really important thing to consider for every business, because when we're assessing bringing AI tools into the business, it feels like a lot of companies are basing those decisions on FOMO, and it's like, we need to get some AI, and actually it's about what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and then is AI or automation, and we shouldn't get those two things conflated either.
Yeah.
Like, but what is the best solution in order to solve that challenge? And if the challenge that you're trying to solve is, as we talked about, increasing the capacity of your back office function, for example, you might want to take a specific process. I mean, an easy one to go with is, say, for example, content creation. You can look at it from a, does that, in fact, actually, do you know what? I'm just going to jump straight into this framework that I have. So my process for doing this, let me bring this slide on. Okay. So here's a process or a framework that I always work to. And now this says, this helps you decide whether to outsource something, use AI assisted technologies, or whether to completely automate it. Now I say outsource because I very much focus on small businesses who are not necessarily looking to increase their spend on headcount, but this could equally be something that is done in-house, or even to hire a person for. Essentially, it's a human done task, right? So the first thing that you want to ask is, with this process, does it require human judgment? And if the answer is yes, you need to assess whether it's repetitive and scalable. And then, if it's if it's not, then actually that's not something that you should be using AI for. Like, just let's use a human for. An example of that could be, building customer relationships, for example, making phone calls. There is software out there that can do automated phone calls. Like, no one wants to get a voice bot on the end of the phone disrupting their day with a cold call. Like, a lot of people find it bad enough to get an actual person, but at least you can relate to a person. And actually, cold calling is still effective if it's done right. But I wouldn't classify that as something to automate, right? So let's. But if it can be structured and it doesn't require human judgment, can it be based into rules? Then actually that's something that is potentially ripe for automation. But I think one step that people often ignore, and you'll see on the right hand side of this diagram, is that whether automation is actually a cost-effective solution long term. Because setting up the automation, like particularly if it's a complex process, yes, it could be automated, it is repeatable, it is scalable. But if it's going to cost you thousands of pounds in order to actually implement that technology and set that up in a way that it works, like, this goes back to our ROI discussion on whether the initial investment into building that is actually going to be worthwhile. And if it is, then yes, automate it. And if it's not, maybe it's something that you can use an AI assisted tool for. When I talk about that, I mean, for example, ChatGPT, and whether that's using using it for whether that's using the out of the box solution, or creating custom GPTs, or even creating GPTs which are linked to an output. So, for example, you use AI, at the end of the day, like, when you're using a tool like ChatGPT, someone is still sat at a keyboard doing a manual process. You're still having to put the prompts in. You're still having to actually take some time to do that. Yes, the outputs will be quicker, but you're still in control of that process. But then you can add APIs onto OpenAI, onto ChatGPT, and actually say, for example, now I've produced this piece of content, I'm going to link that to my website, and it's going to publish it onto the website. So it can be partially automated as a process. So these are just some of the things that you can do, and you'll see there's a QR code on the right hand side of this, and if anybody wants to scan that, this will actually take you to a custom GPT that I have built, which you can ask it questions, and it will use this framework to help you decide for any given specific process whether that is something that you should automate. And I have a visitor as
well. And I suppose just as an additional thing on that as well, is think that question over that cost and thinking about that ROI is also thinking how likely is it that that process might change in the next couple of years? Because actually, if you are going to spend X amount of time doing something that you're like, okay, cool, if we use your example earlier of like 3 years, right, we can get our return on investment back in 3 years. But actually, with the way that the world is changing so much, processes are changing, actually you could do that and decide in 18 months time that a certain part of your process or something within that scenario might be completely different. So it's also about adding that extra thing in of going, can I guarantee that within that period of time, nothing is going to change about this process, and that we are still in 3 years going to be operating in that exact same way? And therefore, cool, yes, worth the investment this year to get all of this built up for us, because in 5 years' time, we're going to be making money off the back of this.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. So I think we've covered everything that was on the agenda. So I do just want to open it up for questions if there are any. We have a little bit of time left, so we've done our 45 minutes. So we'll stick around for as long as it takes to answer any questions. If you're watching this live on LinkedIn, please post any comments in the discussion, and yeah, we'll try and answer those questions for you. So yes, while we're waiting for any questions to come through, maybe we'll just have a bit of a recap. So Natasha, if there was one thing that you wanted people to take away from this session, what would that be?
It would be, think about your how and what ROI you're measuring at the very, very beginning. If you're, an SME or startup business who doesn't have a formal procurement process, if you're in a large business, this will be thought about. But for those businesses in particular, it should be something that is on the table when you're making decisions over suppliers. And then also making sure that if you are in that ops role, that you have the capability to put that into place, whatever it is, what needs updating, how do you need to change the systems, do you need to have a lovely spreadsheet, like whatever it is, just making sure right at the beginning of that process that you have a clear idea of what this is going to look like for you, and that you are keeping that conversation open throughout the year or however long you're using this product for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And I'd probably have two things that I'd want people to take away from this. I think the first thing is understanding what ROI actually is. So, saying, we got 50 grand ROI from this, like, what does that mean? Like, how much was the actual investment into it? Because if the investment into it was 50 grand, then actually you've made nothing. You've made absolutely no progress one way or the other. So I think that's just a really important thing for people to think about. And I think that the one practical takeaway that I think people can have is, when we talked earlier about adding sources to the CRM system, and making sure that those the technologies and the tools that the recruiters have and the job boards that we have are accurately tracked, but more so that try to take that responsibility away from the consultants who actually manually remember where they got that from. Because, like, think about it this way: the amount of times when consultants are having back-to-back calls as well, right? They might, they might not be updating the system, or they could be updating the system. We're expecting people to be instantly adding, a source to a client or a candidate the moment that they've had that call with them. But they're busy people, and they'll try to batch things because I love to do that. I call it going batshit crazy. I love to batch things. I find it a very productive way to work. So let's take that onus away from them. Let's use integration in order to manually populate what those sources are, and that is going to give you a much more accurate representation of where they came from.
Amazing. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Okay. Well, we haven't had any questions come in so far, so we won't wait around too long. But if there are any others, if you want to put them in, even after we've gone off air, we will do our best to get back to you and answer those actually in the conversation. So yeah, let's wrap up. So from my side, I just want to say thank you, Natasha. Thank you for everybody who joined. And you know, if I do encourage, I'm just going to shameless plug, put my GPT back on there. To be honest, it's not. I'm not selling anything. There's no cost to using this, but I do recommend it as a thing. And of course, it's got my branding on it, so you know I would plug that. But if you did want to talk to me, please feel free to connect and reach out.
Awesome. And also, Pete, thank you, because you always organize all of this stuff for me. He is my go-to tech man who gets all of this sorted. So thank you again for having me on and getting all of this together for us.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to join. It's and giving your valuable insight. So yeah, cool. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
All right. See you on the next one, everybody.
Thanks, guys.